the next hour, we're going to talk about sailing in heavy weather. We'll look at boat handling, sail trim, steering, personal protection, and storm tactics. We'll be using a fin keel, spade rudder, moderate displacement boat equipped with a roller reefing system. Heavy weather sailing is a subject of real interest for most good sailors. We'll meet and hear from some of them during the next hour. Warren Lures, John Neal, John Jourdain, Neil Pride, Patrick Adams, Steve Dashew, Steve Taft, David Kennedy, Mike Plant, Tim Urieff, Olaf Harkin, and our crew for the offshore segments, Zan Drazius, Liz Bayless, Alan Little. Together, we'll look at how to actively sail in heavy weather conditions and some of the control techniques that help make it safe and fun. Hello, I'm Mark Schrader. As race director for the BOC Challenge Round the World Yacht Race and a sailing competitor, I've developed a natural interest in heavy weather at sea. As a competitive sailor, I've seen a generation of ocean racing sailboats redefine our idea of what a seaworthy boat is. These boats have in turn changed the type of yachts the average person buys today. The boat that dominates the market today is fin-keeled, has a spade rudder, and is of moderate to light displacement. This makes them fast and responsive, but these characteristics demand more of sailors when the weather turns bad. Most of our knowledge about sailing in heavy weather was developed in older boat designs, much different from modern designs. We need to update and evaluate heavy weather boat handling and storm tactics for the type of boat people are sailing today. Regardless of the vessel, heavy weather is a test of the sailor, who must adjust from the world of normal sailing to a world of extremes. The first extreme is the sheer power of the wind. Wind forces don't just grow proportionally as wind speed increases. The actual force of the wind grows much faster than wind speed. For instance, a doubling of wind speed from 15 knots to 30 knots actually quadruples the wind's power. Those forces mean that everything bad is exaggerated. The boat is harder to control. When it goes out of control, it does so faster and more violently. Equipment breaks more often, usually at the worst time with the worst consequences. Heeling, a comfort factor in better conditions, becomes a control factor. And sailing under control is the key to handling heavy weather.
You cause damage to the boat if you aren't sailing in control. If you have too much sail area up, the boat is going to knock down, it's going to broach, it's going to break gear, it's going to hurt people. So you always want to have the boat in control. And the key is to not have up too much sail area. And that really depends on the individual person. It's how comfortable you are with the boat, how comfortable you are as a sailor, how comfortable your crew is with dealing with it. In the Whitbread, we carried spinnakers in 50 knots of wind, 50-foot seas, and we were surfing at 32 knots of boat speed, but it's a whole different thing. We had 18 professional America's Cup sailors aboard.
Whether you're sailing shorthanded or with a full crew, the basics are the same. Shortening sail remains the fundamental heavy weather tactic. When sails are shortened, heeling is controlled in two ways. The sail plan's center of effort is lowered. The total force on the boat is reduced by giving the wind less surface on which to push. We're going to take a boat, typical of modern yacht design, off California's northern coast to demonstrate techniques and tactics for sailing these boats in heavy weather conditions. Our crew will be short-handed because racing sailors seem to be the only ones with the luxury of a full crew. Most cruisers and people making offshore passages are usually short-handed.
about half the time we're under control here, but the other half the time we're putting that rail solidly in the water. And I'm having to put a lot of weather helm on here to keep the boat sailing in a line. Every once in a while when a gust hits us, you can feel the boat go over even further, and she starts trying to round up. So I think now, rather than later, would be a good time to throw a reef in here. Oh, get the boat back on her feet and sailing well. I'll have a lot more comfortable ride.
Reefing the mainsail is one of the most basic tasks a sailor learns. But in the kind of weather that requires a second reef, it may not seem so basic. The best advice about reefing: if you think you need a reef, you probably do. Go ahead and tug it in. You can always shake it out if you're wrong, but 9 times out of 10, your first instinct will be right. Reefing will move the center of effort down and reduce side forces. The boat will sail flatter, faster, and with less weather helm. There are no set wind speeds when it's time to reef. Every boat is a little different, but a good indicator is the angle of heel and weather helm. If you're heeling more than 25 degrees with the leeward rail in the water and fighting weather helm to control the boat, it's definitely time to shorten sail.
By the time you're thinking about a second reef, chances are the conditions have gotten a bit worse, and that is the wind's picked up or the seas have picked up or both. And it's very important to talk about what you're going to do before you leave the cockpit. Obviously you want to spend as little time as possible up forward, and it's important to get organized, discuss what you're going to do, make sure you have everything you need before you go forward. Sometimes you want to slow the boat down a little bit for your reef. You don't want the boat charging along at 9 knots while the crew's up forward trying to put in a reef. You might want to ask the helmsman just to feather the boat a little bit, slow it down, and once everybody's organized and knows what they're going to do, go ahead and start your reef. Just like the first reef, we're going to have to let the left get the tack secured and the left of the sail tensioned before we go ahead and get the clew secured. It's important to try and keep the slack out of the clew lines in order that they don't get fouled in the middle of your reef. Ready, Liz?
Ready. Made.
All right. If the left is not tight, the left of the sail, and you start tensioning the clew, all the load's going to be on these slides here, and you're going to rip the sail or pull these slides right out of the mast. So make absolutely clear to whoever's helping you that the tack is secure before they start winding on the clew of the sail.
A good helmsman can make reefing easier and safer. Head up a little. By feathering slightly, you can flatten the boat out. When the reef is complete and you're ready to put in the ties, head downwind. Bring the main in towards center. The crew will have a much more stable working platform. This requires a good helmsman. The last thing you want is an accidental jibe while the crew are clinging to the boom. Never take any load on the reef point pringles or the ties. These are for collecting and controlling the extra material. Use a good slip knot that will be easy to untie when you're ready to shake the reef out. Remember to take out all the ties. An overside here is a sure way to rip the sail in heavy conditions.
It's very important once you have your reef ties in that you have some sort of a backup line for your reef line. If the reef's going to be in for any length of time, you run the risk of breaking this reef line, in which case your mainsail is going to be ripped in 3 places here where your reef ties are. So this line, or any big line that you can put through the clew of your reef, a line big enough to take the load if for any reason this reef tie should explode or even come loose. You tie this as tight as you can. sometimes it's even desirable to slack a little bit of the pressure off of the reef line so that this line and your reef line can share the load equally. It will also help add to the longevity of your reef lines.
In heavy weather, you should go ahead and rig the third reef line at the same time you actually take the second reef. Most sailboats have only 2 reefing lines rigged. This means that the line for the first reef must be re-rigged to serve for the third reef. The reefing line is pulled up and through the third reef kringle by a messenger line that is permanently rigged between the second and third reef kringles. This process usually requires preparing the reefing line in advance with a Flemish eye, or loop of light line which attaches to the messenger line. Rigging the third reef line early may seem like unnecessary work, but by the time conditions require a third reef, doing this work will be much harder and more dangerous. Heavy weather sailing is about just that, sailing. In my 2 circumnavigations, I've encountered survival conditions only once. That's true for most sailors. In 99% of the heavy weather conditions, the wind and the seas allow you to go in a direction you want to go. The sails are the engine and the horsepower of the boat, and it's important to know how to use them, particularly in a shortened or reefed configuration. Getting a boat to perform in heavy weather, as in more moderate conditions, is a matter of sail trim, sail management, balance, and control. Assuming a reefed mainsail doesn't need much trim is a mistake often made when the wind picks up. It is definitely not a case of set it and forget it.
Trimming the reefed mainsail is crucial to boat balance. It's really like a giant rudder. If you've got weather helm, you want to depower the main. And if you've got lee helm, you want to put more power on the main to keep the boat balanced and then tracking in the right direction. There are 2 ways of achieving mainsail trim in heavy weather. That's either with a lot of sheet tension and travel her down, or travel her up and ease the main sheet to create twist. The conditions you'd use either of those are depending on the waves. If it's smooth water, you want to use a scenario with the tight leech and travel her down. You are able to let the traveler down because in this type of wind strength, the roller vowing jib will have been rolled up, opening the slot and allowing it without backwinding the main. But when you get into big waves, going over waves where the wind increases at the top of the wave and lulls below, it's very difficult to balance the boat with a tight leached mainsail. So here you should use the main sheet, develop twist in the main, pull the traveler up, and balance the boat.
So to get this main trimmed properly, what we're going to need to do is pull some more main sheet on to get the leech tighter. The easiest way to pull more main sheet on is to let your traveler down a little bit and then wind on your main. And then you pull the traveler up and then see how the boat balances. So how's it feel, Alan?
Feels pretty good.
Okay. And then if everything feels all right, we might want a little more leech tension on to get the little less twist, because the boat seems to balance all right. And to get more leech tension and less twist, you pull the main sheet on a little more.
Head sails provide the other half of the boat's horsepower, but these sails can be a real handful for a short-handed crew in a fresh breeze. In an effort to make life a little easier and safer, roller reefing headsail systems have been developed. Many single-handed ocean racers have embraced this technology for its obvious labor-saving benefits. But more importantly, the systems have become the market standard for medium and large sailboats. Sailors are going to use roller reefing systems in heavy weather, so it's important they know how to use them correctly.
When you're talking about shortening head sails in heavy weather, it's important to make the distinction between a reefing system and a furling system. The reefing system allows you to effectively use a partially rolled up sail, while a furling system is just a way of storing a sail in a rolled up condition. A true reefing system enhances the sail shape by taking some of the draft out of the center. This requires a robust system that won't twist and can take the loads of a reefed sail, and a system that incorporates an independent swivel at the head and the tack. These allow you to roll up the center of the sail before the ends are rolled up, thereby flattening the sail. In heavy weather, the main advantage for the crew is that they don't have to leave the cockpit. This prevents you from having to wrestle a jib and a rolling pitching deck. The other advantage is that particularly for the short-handed crew, is that the stress and exhaustion of wrestling sails is greatly reduced. The design of a roller reefing system is really critical. These are mechanical systems, and they got to operate under thousands of pounds of load. It's vital that you use one that is designed and built to work when the conditions are really difficult. It's also important to check the system just as you would your rigging. It's very important to tension the jib halyard just correctly in a roller reefing system. If you over-tension it, it puts extra load on the bearings and the system won't furl easily. If you under-tension it, you'll have wrinkles in the jib. It's also important to keep a little bit of tension on the sheet when furling to ensure you get a nice, tight, and neat wrap. Again, over-tensioning will make furling difficult. Finally, it's important to check a system if it does not want to furl. This you have to do in any kind of weather. Don't just put it on a winch and force the unit. This can cause severe damage to the system and prevent it from furling at all. Usually the problem is obvious and can be easily corrected.
Roller reefing sails work very well these days, now that the systems to reef them have been developed and the sails have been developed to suit those systems. Nowadays, some of the better furling systems have independent swivels at the tack, which allows the belly of the sail to be taken out of the sail as you roll it up. And the sails now are built with what you call luff foams. This tends to build up the middle of the forestay or headstay so that it's thicker than the top and the bottom of the headstay. So as you roll the sail up, it takes more fabric out of the sail in the middle and flattens the sail. This is key when you're going for reefing in heavy winds.
Okay, yeah, let's make it as easy as possible. Okay, I'm going to ease the jib a bit.
And in those strong winds, reefing the headsail will take some crew coordination. The helmsman should bring the boat into the wind a little as the sheet is eased and the sail is rolled up. To get the right sheeting angle, it's important to move the lead cars forward when the sail is reefed. Rigging a system that allows the cars to be moved by a line led to the cockpit makes the job easier and safer.
Okay, now that we've rolled this sail up, we got to figure out how to trim it right, because as you roll it up, the clew of the sail gets higher and higher, so you end up sailing then with a sail that's the same as any other jib, except for you have a very high clew and a higher tack. And also when you look at the sail, it has lots of wrinkles in it. But don't worry about that. What you want to do is trim it just like any other sail. You get your lead right so that the top and the bottom of the sail are evenly distributed. If you had telltales, they'd be breaking evenly. But you want to have your load so that the top of your sail is not flogging away in this bottom strap. You want the sail to have an equal shape. So by moving the lead forward, you tighten your leech a little, keep the bottom full. If you moved it back, you'd end up with a very flat bottom, flat foot, and a very loose, an open leech. So you want to have a balance in between those two. And then once you get your lead right, you want to trim it in. And when you trim it in, you have to think about the balance between your mainsail and your jib. And the jib is going to be keeping your bow down and keep you powering through those waves. So if you're in really big waves, you need to have a fairly full sail to keep the boat driving.
The way a sail is made is never more important than in heavy weather conditions. Sails should be able to take a real beating without significant damage. The sail's failure in heavy conditions can cause some serious problems, but if you keep an eye out for chafe and small rips, you can usually avoid a shredded sail. Flogging is another sure sail killer. A sail flogging in 40+ knot winds will not only shorten its life, but will destroy it within a short period of time.
Heavy weather is the ultimate test for sails. If they're going to break down, that's when they're going to break down. So when you're building sails for heavy weather, there are certain things that you really got to make sure are correct. You've got to make sure that the stitching's strong enough. In most cases, that means at least triple rows of stitching. It means that the reinforcement patches in the corners should radiate deep enough into the sail to distribute the loads from the corners into the body of the sail. You have to ensure that the cloth weight itself is going to be heavy enough to withstand the loadings in the heavy air loadings. And one key item is that you need to have a leech line on any heavy weather sail, because if the sail starts to flog, that's the first way that the material will start breaking down.
Controlling sails and reducing flogging can be a challenge in a fresh breeze. A full batten mainsail can be a real advantage. Not only do full-length battens quiet the sail and add to its life, They help maintain effective shape in heavy winds, making it easier to get the proper trim. It's important to have sails that are not only strongly built, but that will maintain good shape when shortened down. Remember, the goal is to balance the boat and keep it moving forward, not sideways. Raising and lowering a full batten main can sometimes be a problem if they're not fitted with special slides at the mast. These bat slides take the compression load from the battens and allow the sail to slide freely. With all the emphasis on shortening sail in heavy weather, it would be easy to think of the wind as the major concern, but it's the seas, particularly breaking waves, that can cause the problems. The art of boat handling in heavy weather involves knowing how to work the boat through the waves. And until you do it, it's hard to comprehend how much concentration, fast reaction, and just sheer hard work this kind of steering requires. The key to upwind steering is, again, balance. You need enough drive to move through the large seas and the right sail combination and trim to balance the helm, giving maximum control.
Well, the first thing you have to do when sailing a boat up the wind in heavy conditions is to get a feel for the seas that you're sailing in and to try and get the boat into a motion that's consistent with the seas. If you try slugging into some big waves, you're going to wind up losing. I've seen it in conditions on boats where the boat was extremely difficult to sail, and the problem was that we didn't have enough sail area up on the boat to make the boat move fast enough so that it wasn't being thrown around by the seas. And once we realized that and shook a reef out of the main and got the boat balanced, then the motion of the boat was very, very nice. Although the first reaction is that when you get into heavy seas and moderately heavy air, the first thing you wind up doing is taking sail off the boat. That's not correct. You really have to balance the two of them out and figure out which is going to make your boat go best in those conditions.
In 35 knots of true wind with higher gusts and building seas, the conditions were perfect for Zan Dryjas to demonstrate upwind steering, but far from perfect for our camera crew.
Big wave, wet one. There's no reason why sailing upwind in 35 has to be any more difficult than sailing upwind in 25. As long as you shorten sail enough, the boat's basically going to be behaving similarly. The waves are going to be a bit bigger, obviously, and it is going to be wetter. Ideally, you want to achieve a reasonable angle of heel and be able to keep enough boat speed to sail through the waves. You're not going to be able to point as high into the wind, and generally speaking, you're going to have to take your foot off the gas just a little bit in order to make it comfortable for your crew. One of the problems you may run into is on the tops of the swells, you're going to experience quite a bit more wind than you will down in the troughs. There's really not a lot you can do about this. But as you come up the face of the swell, the boat will start to get knocked down, and the boat will want to head up naturally. And you want to kind of allow the boat to do this and sail a nice S, sort of an S. Basically, the boat's going to find a groove that it can sail in. As long as the sails are balanced and your helm, you don't have a lot of weather helm or lee helm, you're going to be sailing just slightly off the wind than you would normally, a little bit lower and a little bit slower. Important to maintain enough speed that the waves, the larger waves, aren't going to be knocking you off your course. You want to keep an eye out for those really big waves and anticipate their arrival. You may want to crack off slightly and get a little speed before they arrive, or try and get around them, depending on how actively you're able to sail with your crew. But generally speaking, you're going to have to take your foot off the gas a little bit, make sure your sails are reefed down enough to where the boat's riding fairly comfortably at a reasonable angle of heel, and yet you still have enough power to be able to maneuver in the larger waves. So as you come up the face of the wave, it's important to keep enough speed that you can come up the face, and as you get to the top, steer up over the top, and then back down over the windward side of the wave. You want to keep your foot off the gas enough to where you're not launching off the tops of the waves, but you still need to maintain enough speed to where you can power out of the bottom of that trough in the lighter wind with your reefed down sails and have the ability to steer up as the wave approaches the bow.
Maneuvering around breaking crests and taking waves bow on is the goal. Be careful not to stall the boat by pinching too much as you head up. Then drive off down the backside, looking ahead to pick your spot on the next wave. Try to find a flat spot to tack in, then drive off to build up speed before heading back up. Unlike going to weather, sailing downwind in heavy air can really be fun, as long as you're in control of the boat. Boats with modern underbodies are capable of surfing well beyond hull speed and being easily controlled. That control is a matter of sail balance and how your boat handles in the conditions. Most modern boats are stable and easier to steer at higher speed, and that downwind speed comes from surfing on waves.
Well, we got some pretty good waves right here, and luckily they're all from pretty much the same direction. Sometimes you might get one or two big waves, directions crossing each other, and it makes life a little more complicated. What we're doing right here is as the stern of the boat gets lifted up by the wave, we want to put just as she starts to lift up the stern, we want to square the boat off perpendicular to the wave, put the stern square into the wave, and let the boat start sliding down the face of the wave. And just before she starts to slow down, you want to head back up just a little bit towards a broad reach and get ready for the next wave to come up behind you. Here we go. Head up just a little bit there. And get ready for the next wave. Ideally, as the boat starts to surf, you want as little turn in the wheel as possible. You should have the boat aimed straight down the face and just kind of let her take off and straighten it out and come up slowly as the boat starts to slow down and get ready for the next wave behind you.
A good helmsman is concentrating on more than just steering.
The helmsman is concentrating always on the feel of the boat to make sure, in the case of running downwind or before the storm, that he's not going to broach the boat. He's constantly looking at the sheets, he's looking at the rigging, he's looking for any telltale signs that something on the boat is going to give out.
When learning to steer in heavy seas, it is important for a helmsman to visualize a larger seascape upon which he can move. The ranks of waves are not continuous or uniform. Crests will break on parts of some waves and not on others. The helmsman's job is to pick a path that avoids as many of the breaking waves as possible. In most conditions, you won't be surfing continuously. Being able to maneuver is important. When the wind is moderate, you have more latitude. But when the wind picks up, the slot where you can go gets narrower. Head up too high and you broach to weather. Go too low and you round down. Either way, broaching is something to avoid in any conditions. But to naval architect and author Steve Dashew, it's the heavy seas that pose the real threat.
Broaching is a subject which people get real uptight about. And in moderate conditions, it really doesn't mean anything. It's a gust of wind comes along, the boat gets out of control, you round up, the sails flap, big deal. But if you've got big seas running and the boat gets sideways to the waves and then another second or third wave comes along, it's a breaking sea, now you've got a problem because the boat is in a very vulnerable attitude. So the question becomes, how do you avoid the broach? And you do that by keeping the boat under control. And keeping the boat under control is best done running at the fastest speed that you can control the boat at. Now, at some point, a situation is going to arise where a wave comes along or a really strong squall, and the steering equilibrium of the boat is overpowered, and now you're lying beam to the seas with the sails flogging like mad, and maybe the spreader's in the water, who knows. To get the boat headed back downwind as quickly as possible, what you have to do is relieve pressure on the rig. The quickest way to do that is to dump the vang or the main sheet. The next thing is to let the jib go. But whatever you have to do to get the boat upright so the rudder gets a good bite and you can get the bow turned off is what you have to do.
There are two ways of broaching a boat. There is a round up and a round down. It is always preferable, if you are going to broach, to round up than it is to round down. When you round up, which is what most people call a broach, the boat tends to just round up into the wind. The sails will luff. Eventually you'll be able to drive the boat off and continue on your course. When you have a round down, it means that going downwind that you have jibed the boat unintentionally, and the boat has jibed over and is going in a different direction. That uncontrolled jibe is going to present you problems because the sails are on the wrong side of the boat. The jib's on the wrong side of the boat. If you have a preventer on the main, it is on the wrong side of the boat. And once you round down, the boat will tend to lay over in the water and virtually stop, and the sails are going to pin the boat down in the water, and then you have a real difficult time getting the boat up. Then once it rounds up into the wind, you have control of the boat, and you want to continue back on the course you were, then you have to jibe the boat again in heavy air. That's where you get in trouble. Your best bet is, in those conditions, if you round down and broach, and you are able to get the boat up, get the boat going on the course that the sails are set on, get the boat going and tack the boat around, don't jibe the boat. Heavy weather jibes are very, very dangerous. Tacking is usually pretty easy, so don't be afraid to tack the boat around in heavy air.
There are a couple of basics that will help avoid a broach. Try to keep the boat sailing flat. By reducing heel and weather helm, you cut the tendency to round up. Keep the boat heading straight down the face of waves. If a wave catches either quarter, it may spin the boat out. And probably most important, avoid sailing by the lee. An accidental jibe in heavy seas can be a real disaster. Jibing in heavy air is one of the most dangerous maneuvers in sailing. The penalties for mistakes are usually severe. This doesn't mean you can't jibe when you have to, but it should be done carefully, and timing is very important. First, pick the place and time. You want to do the jibe when there is good boat speed, usually moving down the face of the wave. The boat speed gives good control and decreases the apparent wind. When you're headed dead downwind, bring the main into the center of the boat and take enough wraps off the winch to allow the sail to be let out quickly on the new jibe. Once the boom is centered, continue to steer by the lee until the main comes over to the new jibe. Then quickly let the sheet run without allowing any pressure on the sail until it's completely out. Then come up to the new course and square up the boat to the next wave. Knowing all the heavy weather techniques really isn't enough when you're in rough conditions. There's an important psychological element too.
If there's one dangerous part of heavy weather sailing, it's allowing yourself to be overcome by fear, to have an inertia set in. You're in the boat, it's blowing like stink, they're big seas, you're obviously concerned, maybe the weather's going to get worse, you don't know what the situation is, and you don't do anything. You know you should be on deck, you hear the leech of the jib chattering, the lead isn't right, you know you should move the lead forward, or you should put up more sail or take sail down, but you're tired and you're concerned, and you sit there and you just don't do anything. That's the most dangerous part of heavy weather sailing.
I've never steered us through anything this big.
If you're just starting out and you get out in 25, 30 knots of wind and you've got a bit of a lumpy sea, I mean, you're concerned. You don't know what your capabilities are. You don't know what your boat's capabilities are. When that breeze passes, all of a sudden your anxiety level's gone up. Next time it takes 35 knots or 40 knots or 50 knots.
There doesn't seem to be any substitute for experience when it comes to heavy weather sailing. With it comes the confidence that's essential.
The real test is building your own confidence. It really comes down to a question of self-confidence more than anything else. Most people are nervous of sailing in strong winds, lack confidence, and therefore they don't really feel comfortable in it. And I think the only way you really get confidence is to get out there and try it. There's no way around that. But confidence really also comes from having the understanding of your equipment, knowing it isn't going to break down, let you down, and you're only dealing with the elements. Now, if you've got your boat right, the sails right, the rig right, you can really go out there with a certain amount of confidence, know you're safe, and battle with the elements. And when you get experience with it, you'll get the self-confidence, and thereafter you'll enjoy it.
When thinking about preparing for heavy weather sailing, it's important to emphasize that a good, well-prepared boat will take care of you long after you're no longer able to take care of yourself. In the 1979 Fastnet race, many crews, fearing capsized, abandoned ship. The crews were lost, and the ships were found floating safely the next day. In thinking about storm survival, think about preserving the crew. A cold, wet, fatigued crew will not make good decisions. The first and most important element of personal protection is staying on the boat. A sailor swept overboard in heavy conditions has almost no chance of rescue or survival. A safety harness and tether should be mandatory equipment anytime you're offshore. The strict rule is, be attached to the boat anytime you are on deck, even in the cockpit. This usually requires jack lines to be rigged, allowing crew to clip on and move forward without having to disengage from the boat. The jack line should be made of 6,000-pound test nylon webbing, which lies flat and is less prone to roll underfoot than metal cable or line. The tether should be long enough to attach on the windward jack line, but extend to allow work on the low side. The harness should be well made and designed for the purpose.
If I can stress anything, don't go out and buy the economy model. When you're talking about a life harness and a line and a hook, you want the best, and you want to know absolutely guaranteed that that's not going to break and that's not going to snap off under the load of a 200-pound man being washed down the deck or being washed over.
Some higher quality foul weather gear features built-in harnesses. The main advantage is that the harness is not a separate piece of equipment, but you'll have to wear the jacket whenever you need the harness. At the other end of the spectrum are separate harnesses like the Switlik Fastnet that are serious pieces of safety equipment. It has a mesh vest which keeps the harness from getting tangled and distributes loads. These harnesses and some high-quality foul weather jackets are designed to integrate inflatable flotation devices. While not Coast Guard approved, they have been in use in Europe for years and provide much more buoyancy than standard PFDs. The importance of flotation was brought home in the last Whitbread round-the-world race. There were 5 separate incidents in the stormy Southern Ocean when sailors were washed overboard. In 4 of those cases, the sailors were rescued, but only because they stayed afloat. When it comes to safety equipment, there's an important principle. To be safe, a sailor must actually wear the safety gear. That means comfort and convenience are important safety features. The awkward, poorly designed harness won't be worn. Likewise, poorly designed foul weather gear won't do its job.
Wet weather gear, when you really don't need wet weather gear, it's really wet.
Warren Lures learned early what it's like to be wet and cold at sea.
I used the analogy once before. It's once you get chilled, it's like standing out in a rainstorm in 20-degree weather and wrapping yourself in a wet wool blanket and sleeping on the porch through the night. I mean, it just saps your energy and you've got nothing left. You're very lethargic. And of course, when you get to that state, that's where the real danger comes in, because that's where you're going to make a mistake either mentally or physically, and including possibly even falling overboard. It's imperative that you keep yourself warm, comfortable, dry, and well fed in heavy weather conditions.
Well-designed and constructed foul weather gear, like Henry Lloyd, can take dousings and still keep you dry because of watertight material and seams, double wrist and leg closures, and double protective flaps for the coat and pants zippers. It's important to have a good hood and fleece collar that keep the neck warm and protect it from chafe in long use. Plus, the gear should have the ability to integrate flotation devices both inside and outside. Hypothermia is a danger, but in heavy weather, even experienced sailors can be incapacitated by something more common, seasickness.
I think seasickness is maybe the #1 factor when the Coast Guard gets involved in the cases I've been on.
Probably no one has more rescue experience or had more personal exposure to crews in distress at sea than the instructors at the Coast Guard's Motor Lifeboat School. On one rescue mission, the crew of a sailboat was too weak to even grab a line offered by their rescuers. Seasickness had put lives in jeopardy.
Some years ago off of Point St. George, we had a 34-foot sailboat, man and wife and a child, and they were in such tough condition, they just couldn't take a tow line. Sea conditions were such that we just couldn't come alongside, and we ended up, helicopter had to drop a basket to try and get them in it, and they were so exhausted and just beat to their knees from seasickness that we ended up with a Coast Guard air crewman from the helo, had to go down and individually place each person and ride up the basket with, I think first with the baby, then the wife, and then the husband, and they abandoned their boat. Really, really living on the edge when you have to do that.
Preventing seasickness before it gets to this extreme state is essential. Even experienced sailors who have acclimated to the motion at sea will take anti-seasickness medication when they know the weather will be extreme. The question, are you wearing your patch, is becoming a sort of sailor shorthand for seasickness protection. The patch is the Transdern Scope, sold by prescription and worn behind the ear. This timed-release medication is considered by many to be the most effective and convenient of the anti-seasickness drugs. A common side effect is dry mouth. There may be other more serious side effects, so as with any seasick medication, read the package carefully before using it. Stressing the human element goes far beyond personal protection gear. It also applies to our general approach in this program. Volumes have already been written on the importance of preparing a boat for ocean going and the rigors of heavy weather. We can't, nor do we want to try to condense that information. It's too important, but it's a subject for another tape. Instead, we want to deal with storm preparation in a larger sense, limiting ourselves to 3 very broad areas of preparation of both crew and boat. The first involves preparing the boat and crew together, testing the boat's capabilities so you can learn your own as well, long before you ever encounter heavy weather.
You know, you can read a lot of books, you can learn a lot from books, but you can only learn so much, and you can't get real experience until you take your boat out in heavy weather. And I found that you really reduce a lot of anxiety, because most people, hopefully, are real concerned and real scared about heavy weather sailing on the ocean, because there are a lot of things that can happen. And by taking their boats out ahead of time, small distances, maybe 50 miles, what some people do is just go out of sight of land, straight out into the ocean for 24 hours and then turn around and come back. But finding out how they handle that, and just as importantly, how their boat handles heavy weather before they get out there, makes all the difference in the world. Because if you're in the middle of 50 knots off the east or west coast of the U.S. and are real scared about your survival, that's not the time to be trying out different sail combinations and trying out heaving to or lying a hull or towing warps or using a drogue. The time to be doing that is before you go. And
related to knowing your boat and the boat's capabilities is having this knowledge evenly spread through a shorthanded crew.
Well, I think it's very important that everyone on the boat should be able to do everything on the boat. And if they don't know how, they should learn. And the skipper should take time to teach the crew how to do each part of the boat, because there'll be times when the skipper will be doing something and someone else has to steer. The skipper will be steering, someone has to reef the main. There's times when everyone should be able to do everything on the boat.
Finally, it is important that the basic systems on the boat, the main reefing, the roller reefing, the traveler, be simple, reliable, and easy to use. Heavy weather has a way of finding the weak spots of all equipment. Usually, control systems that are inconvenient to use or take more physical effort than they should in light air won't work at all in a storm. Before you head out, there are a few other things you can do to make sailing in heavy weather a little easier. Have a good way to secure coiled halyards. A bungee cord loop or a sail tie works well. Set up the nylon web jacklines before heading offshore so they're ready to go. And a little advanced work with your roller reefing headsail will really pay off.
One of the first things you want to do to make your life easier when you go out sailing is find out, predetermine the jib car leads for your headsail. The way to do this is to go out on a day with varying wind conditions and adjust your headsail to keep your boat in balance. Typically we do this for varying wind conditions of 5 knots, 15 to 20 knots, 20 to 25 knots. Once you get your sail in the proper amount of sail out and you've got your boat in balance, mark your jib car lead. Now whenever you go out in similar conditions, you'll know the exact position of your jib car lead. Now we're going to go out and look for varying conditions of wind. We're going to look for these 5-knot windows, 15 to 20, 20 to 25 knots of wind. We're going to roll the sail up until our boat is nicely in balance. We have the proper trim on her. Then we're going to take a magic marker, indelible ink pen, and mark along the foot of the sail where it is when it rolls up. Now, whenever we encounter similar conditions, we know exactly how far to roll the sail up again.
Beyond equipping the boat with the right gear, there's a lot that the sailor can do to prepare the boat's control systems to work well in heavy weather.
And you want to know that reefing system backwards and forwards. Again, not only practice it at the dock, but obviously have extensively practiced it out in the bay or off the coast. So you really know it works. A good slab reefing system, I believe you can do the whole thing within 30 seconds. You should have the halyard pre-marked so you can drop that mainsail down to a certain point. You should have the other lines pre-marked so you can just tighten them up. And to me, that's probably one of the best safety things that you can do for controlled sailing. Again, you hear that word, controlled sailing.
When you're finally offshore in a blow, and it looks like the weather will get even worse, the next step in controlled sailing is to set up for the storm sail. On boats with roller reefing, this is the time to furl the headsail completely and set a storm sail on an inner stay. The quick release lever by ABI makes the job fast and easy as long as you get it up early. With this stay, you have a big advantage. You can set a new sail without having to unfurl and drop the larger jib.
One of the biggest advantages of having a storm staysail is not only does it reduce the sail area up forward here, but it also brings your center of effort down closer to the boat's deck, which will reduce your heeling, and also it moves that effort back aft, which will help the helmsman steer the boat by reducing the weather helm.
Sloop-rigged boats without roller reefing and an inner stay would set a storm jib on the forestay. Storm sails are not only smaller, but built to take the rigors of sailing in high winds. The storm staysail uses a tack pennant and is high off the deck to avoid being hit by waves. The high visibility orange is a real safety plus when you're in a sea of white foam. Leech line adjustment is very important on all storm sails. Any flutter can do some serious damage. The sail is usually led inboard and forward of the normal jib sheeting leads. Experiment to find the right lead and set up a system that is ready to go. For shortening the mainsail beyond the second reef, there are two options: a third reef or a storm trysail. The third reef is straightforward, particularly if the reefing line was rigged earlier in milder conditions. The alternative is the storm trysail. This sail is set on the mast but does not use the boom. This is the classic storm configuration: a storm staysail or jib and a trysail. The sail area has been significantly reduced and the center of effort is down and in the middle of the boat. It's a good setup, but you need to practice and experiment with the sails long before you head offshore.
Now that you've got your trysail hoisted, there's a couple things you need to consider. One is the fore and aft lead of your trysail sheets. You want to eliminate all flutter in this sail and get equal tension both on your leech and your foot. Remember, you're going to be carrying this in upwards of 40 knots of wind, and any flutter on this is going to tear the sail apart in no time at all. Another tool to use to eliminate that flutter is your leech cord. Remember to pull this as taut as you can just to eliminate the flutter on the leech of your sail. The other thing to consider are your two trysail sheets, both port and starboard. These act as a barber hauler to position your clew either to windward or leeward, depending on your point of sail. You can use these things to carry this trysail to its greatest advantage.
The effort it takes to rig the trysail is its biggest disadvantage. Without a separate track on the mast, it's often more than most people can handle.
What they don't realize is how difficult it is to rig and to operate a trysail on a boat. And it's not something you can do for the first time as you get into storm conditions. And that's what a trysail is used for, is to allow the boat to either heave to or just keep the boat moving in a particular direction in storm conditions. And I have likened a changing to a trysail or putting a trysail up to trying to change a tire on a car on a freeway while a car is still moving. It is a very difficult task to do.
So far, we've been talking about sailing in heavy weather, but there may be times when you'll have to use storm tactics. Understanding your options is the first step in handling any storm. In some storms, the wind and the seas build to a point where you can't just keep sailing in the direction you want to go. You have to take extraordinary measures to preserve the yacht and the crew. And once you're in that situation, you've got two choices. The active tactics, it's like running before the seas, or more passive, with proper setup, just letting the boat tend itself. The choice you make should be based on at least three factors. Sea room. Are you far enough from land to run downwind safely? Condition of the crew. Is the crew unskilled or already so exhausted you just shouldn't waste energy trying to cope with active boat handling? Type of boat. Some, mainly older boat designs, aren't suited for the more active downwind tactics. Each crew has a different point at which they adopt storm tactics. For some, the condition of the crew is the key. For others, it's the pounding the boat is taking trying to make progress to windward. However, the pounding the hull is taking is not as important as what's happening with the rigging. How do you know when the rig's being pushed too far?
It's very obvious. When you hit a wave and the whole mast shakes and trembles and shimmers, and you find yourself subconsciously looking up to see if it's still there, that's the time you know that you've gone too far. When you're pounding the weather, it usually means that it's windy. And when it's windy, it usually means that it's time to reef. Reefing can in itself be dangerous because it puts a whole new load in the mast that wasn't there before. We've introduced one load, which is the shock load when you hit a wave. It's the load that the mast, the momentum of the mast that wants to keep on going after the boat has stopped. That's a whole new load we've put on because we're pounding the weather. Now we're going to introduce a new load on the mast by reefing. And how that happens is that as we lower the mainsail, the head of the mainsail is no longer at the truck of the mast. It's no longer supported by the stays, the head stay and the back stay that come up. It's no longer in direct opposition of those stays. It's now somewhere in the middle of the section. What that does is through leech tension on the mainsail, it pulls the mast in a direction that's not supported by a stay. So although you think that you're doing the right thing by reefing, and indeed you are, you're lowering your sail area, you are also creating a new load on the mast. And this is the time when, if you have a staysail stay, or you have a baby stay, or you have any other stay to hold the mast forward anywhere along the mast, that's the time to put it on.
The most common rigging failure is a broken shroud or stay. If you lose a shroud, you can sometimes save the mast by tacking immediately. Regardless of the failure, quick action seems to be the key.
You can come pretty close to losing a mast and not really losing it as long as you think quickly. If it's moving all around, try to stay it as quickly and as best you can with whatever means you have. Halyards are already there, they're already rigged up. hook on whatever extra stays you have, such as a baby stay, staysail stay, running backs. Support the mast as best you can, as fast as you can.
To reduce the pounding the boat and crew are taking, a primary storm tactic is to turn downwind, running before wind and seas, which allows the helmsman a chance to use the advantages inherent in boats of modern design.
I think the techniques that one would use in heavy weather conditions is changing with boat design. The Colin Archer style boat, it made a lot of sense. You know, they're often double-ended, and you had severe conditions, you just hove to or dropped all your sails, and the boat kind of stayed there, and the waves came and the waves went over it, but the boat was so heavily built it handled it. And the steering is so good with the new boats. In severe conditions, I think one would try to keep sail up, to keep speed on the boat, and with speed on the boat you have excellent steering. So like in the old days when it may be a, quote, a survival situation, today you're still sailing downwind and, you know, in a controlled condition.
Speed and control are the keys to making this tactic work. Whitbread racers are using the same techniques, but for different reasons. The short-handed sailor caught in the same conditions will still want to move with the waves as fast as possible, while maintaining solid control of the boat. The object here is to minimize the impact of breaking waves.
When the top of the wave blows off like that, if you can sail down the wave and go with this wave that's breaking, the force on the boat will be a whole lot less. It's like if you're a skier and you get caught in an avalanche, don't stand still, try and go in the direction that it's going. Chances are you may be able to outrun it, or if anything does hit you, it's going to hit you with less impact than if you're standing still.
On this downwind course, the boat will be surfing at speeds far greater than most sailors are used to. This shouldn't be a problem unless you're having trouble controlling the boat. Usually on a fin-keel spade rudder boat, the extra speed will increase steering control, reduce the apparent wind speed, and reduce the speed at which waves hit the boat.
From a safety standpoint, too, the speed is very important. The closer the speed of the boat is to the speed of the wave, the less force the wave has to act on the boat. It's healthier to keep some speed on and actually keep as much speed on as you can handle.
The boat's maneuverability should help the helmsman avoid breaking waves. But if conditions deteriorate, it's possible to find yourself without many choices in directions. That's what happened to Steve Taft in the 1979 Fastnet race.
And the waves were way over the top of the mast, and the mast on our boat was, oh gosh, about almost 60 feet off of the water. And it was about the top 15 feet of the wave that was blowing off that really did all of the damage. And in sailing there, we really had to work the boat around these waves so that when we could see something that was blowing off of the top, we had to run down with that as it would roll over the boat. And as it would roll over the boat, then you could get back up and sail where you wanted to go. And I'd brought up before about sailing where the wind and waves allow you to steer. And when one of the other guys came up and relieved me, he said, well, what are you steering? And I said, well, I'm not really sure. Just try and keep it between east and south. And that was about as close as we could reasonably sail the boat. And unless you were out there and unless you were experiencing, you can't believe the power of these waves and the power of this wind.
Running before a storm is the most active tactic a sailor can adopt, but it's definitely not for everyone. It requires that everybody on the crew be able to steer in these conditions, and it can be very hard on the helmsman.
The concentration of keeping the boat lined up, I found that it's really easy to get distracted or get fatigued, and that's why we found it necessary to change crew people really often, change the helmsperson in real heavy condition, because you can only keep that level of concentration, that level of effort steering either with a wheel or with a tiller for a short time in real heavy conditions. That's a real problem with shorthanded sailors. You know, most of the people cruising that we meet most of the cruising boats have only 2 people on board.
The other very real limitation on this active tactic is the type of boat attempting it, and specifically, how the boat steers while surfing at high speeds.
The most important thing to look at when you're evaluating how your boat's going to handle in heavy weather and the tactics that you're going to use is the steering capability of the vessel and the crew. A boat which has moderate to light displacement, which has spade rudder or skeg-mounted rudder and a fin keel, is going to steer at high speeds better than a heavier displacement boat with a attached rudder and a full-length keel. That's not to say that one is particularly better than the other, depending on the conditions, but just that the steering capabilities of boats are going to be different, and the speed at which you're going to keep the boat running is going to be different.
Although this high-speed tactic has its advantages, the time may come to slow the boat down. When the boat is increasingly more difficult to control, it's time to put on the brakes. To restore control, the idea is to slow the boat down, but still retain enough speed to keep some maneuverability. The traditional method of slowing a boat down is to tow warps. A better approach is to use a modern drogue.
What we've got here is a gale rider, which is a drogue, which is designed to slow the boat down, not to actually stop the boat. We're going to use this when we've got so much wind that even under bare poles we're just flying down the faces of waves. This will slow us down, moderate our speed, so we still have enough water going past our rudder that we have control of the boat, and we can keep ourselves from falling off the waves, but we're not going so slow that the waves overtake us so rapidly they smack us from behind and drive us around.
To be most effective, it should always be used with a helmsman steering to line up the boat with the seas. It should never be used as a sea anchor streamed from the bow, as the leeway it allows might cause a broken rudder. The time may come when a crew is just too exhausted or beat up to continue actively steering the boat, and that's when a passive tactic is called for, letting the boat tend itself while the crew goes below to rest. The most common method is heaving to, which requires turning the boat into the wind, backwinding the headsail, centering the main, and putting the helm hard over. If it works, the boat should jog along, making only a couple of knots to weather.
What we're going to do is heave to. We're not quite sure whether these fin keel type sailboats will heave to very well, but we have a feeling with the triple reefed main and our staysail, since both those sails are so close to the mast, we might be able to get some satisfaction out of it. So all Liz is going to do here is tack the boat over, and we're going to leave all the sails set just the way they are. The main is going to be centered on the Traveler, and the staysail will leave cleated down on our starboard side, come over on our starboard tack, it'll become backwinded. Okay, whenever you're ready, go ahead and do it.
Okay, let's try it here and see what happens.
Okay, put her over hard.
The results aboard Segway weren't impressive. The bow blew off to leeward and she lay beam to the seas. This is a common characteristic of modern boats which tend to pivot around their fin keels. It's also a perfect example of why a sailor should be practicing these techniques long before they're needed.
We've got the boat settled down now. She's hove to, but unfortunately it's not a really good position to be in. We've got the wind almost directly on our beam, which means we've got the seas on our beam also, and which is a potentially pretty dangerous position to be in.
With testing and practice, you may find a sail combination that allows you to heave to successfully. It can be a valuable option to have. At the far end of the scale is the survival tactic of lying a hull, dropping all sail and letting the boat simply fend for itself.
Some people talk about lying a hull, and that, from our experience and from the people that we know that have been rolled over, lying a hull is the most dangerous of all the tactics, because the boat is a beam or slightly lower than the beam of the seas, and if a breaking sea catches it, I mean, there's nothing you can do. It's over you go.
Any boat lying a beam to breaking seas can be in serious trouble, as this dramatic tape shows. By far, the majority of capsizes happen when a boat is hit on the beam by a breaking wave. Although a sailboat with a deep, heavy keel would fare better than this fishing boat, a rollover is a very real threat.
He's on the side.
Hey, start picking people out of the water.
These are survival conditions. The vast majority of sailing is done in conditions far less severe. Chances are good that the average sailor will never run into true survival conditions, but nevertheless, you should be prepared. It seems that the really good, experienced sailors don't dwell on the rough weather they've gone through. In fact, when you talk to them, they sometimes can't recall details of some really miserable experiences. And that's because heavy weather is just a small and natural part of sailing. Each person has a threshold of what they consider heavy weather, and with experience, that threshold rises. Conditions that would have been very frightening before just become part of sailing. Some of my most satisfying times sailing were after the worst part of the storms had passed. I'd sit in the cockpit and just watch the sea and the sky, and I had the feeling that I had really accomplished something. Sailing in heavy weather doesn't have to be a terrifying experience. It can actually be one of the most exhilarating and rewarding parts of the sport. Although most sailors will be far more conservative than these round-the-world racers, sailing under control is still the key. Being able to control the boat goes a long way toward reducing the fear factor. We've been talking about sailing in heavy air conditions rather than how to survive major storms. And we're not suggesting that you go looking for really bad weather. But with some basic knowledge and preparation, you can learn to not only handle heavy air sailing, but to actually enjoy it.